What does it mean to bury your dead? Not the logistics, not the paperwork or the funeral home or the decision between cremation and a casket, but the act itself, the impulse, the moment when someone you loved stopped breathing. Instead of walking away, instead of leaving the body for the scavengers in the cold, you stayed, you dug, you covered. For how long have humans done that? The answer is stranger, deeper, and more unsettling than any textbook will admit. The evidence, buried in limestone caves and frozen Russian plains, suggests that the urge to honor the dead predates Homo sapiens itself. It predates our species by hundreds of thousands of years. And that fact changes everything we think we know about what makes us human. Begin with what we can say with confidence. Roughly 78,300 years ago, somewhere on the tropical coast of what is now Kenya, a community of early Homo sapiens buried a child. The child was about 2.5 to 3 years old. They were placed on their right side in a shallow pit, legs drawn up toward the chest, body carefully arranged. Geochemical analysis of the surrounding sediment shows the pit was deliberately dug. The bones held the telltale signature of decomposition in place, meaning the body was not moved after death. It was put there intentionally and left. We named the child Mtoto, a Swahili word. It means simply child. This is the oldest confirmed Homo sapiens burial in Africa. The community that buried Mtoto left no monument, no inscription, no explanation. Just a small pit, just the act. What did that act mean to the people who performed it? Before we can begin to answer, we have to go back further, much further. Because Homo sapiens was not the first. In the Zagros Mountains of what is now northern Iraq, inside a cave called Shanidar, a research team made one of the 20th century's most electrifying discoveries. Buried among sediment layers were the remains of at least 10 Neanderthals, our evolutionary cousins, not our direct ancestors. One of them stopped researchers cold. Shanidar 1, nicknamed Nandi by the excavators, was a male Neanderthal who died somewhere between 35 and 50 years of age, roughly 45,000 to 70,000 years ago. Sometime when he was young, he received a violent blow to the face, severe enough to likely leave him partially blind in his left eye. His right arm had been fractured and then atrophied over time, eventually losing function below the elbow. He was deaf, partially sighted, missing the effective use of one arm, and struggled to walk. He was also, despite all of this, middle-aged. In the Pleistocene, a world of cave lions, cave bears, and competing hominins, that is a near-impossible survival profile. The only plausible explanation is that others around him had compensated for what he could not do, that someone fed him, carried things for him, kept predators away. His survival was a group decision, repeated every single day, for years. They were caring for the ones who could not fully care for themselves. The category of member of the group extended even to those who could not pull their weight in a hunt. That changes your picture of them, doesn't it? Among the Shanidar Neanderthals, one skeleton, Shanidar 4, was found surrounded by large clumps of pollen. In 1971, archaeologist Ralph Selecki announced to the world that Neanderthals had buried this individual on a bed of wildflowers. Suddenly, Neanderthals weren't brutes. They were mourners. They were romantics. They placed yarrow and groundsel and grape hyacinth on the bodies of their dead. For decades, this image reshaped how we understood our cousins. Then, in 2023, a new analysis took another look at those pollen clumps. The flowers represented in the sediment bloom at completely different times of year. They could not have been gathered in a single bouquet on a single day. The more probable explanation: ground-nesting bees had burrowed into the sediment near the body over the years, carrying pollen as they dug. And yet, even the 2023 team was careful about what they were and were not claiming. They were not saying Neanderthals had no mortuary behavior. New excavations at the same site have since found an individual, called Shanidar Z, placed in a channel that appears to have been deliberately shaped to receive a body. The evidence for intentional burial at Shanidar has not disappeared. It has simply gotten more complicated. This is how archaeology actually works. Not clean answers, but the slow accumulation of detail. Now, here's the finding that flips everything on its head. 30,000 years ago, on the eastern edge of what is now European Russia, a community of Ice Age hunter-gatherers buried their dead with a degree of effort that defies comprehension. The site is called Sungir. 3 individuals were interred there, an adult male and 2 adolescents placed head-to-head in a single grave. All 3 were covered in red ochre, a mineral pigment associated with ritual across dozens of ancient sites worldwide. More than 13,000 beads made of mammoth ivory. Carved into consistent shapes, perforated, threaded, some arranged in patterns across the body that suggest they were sewn directly onto clothing, a tunic, a cap, a pair of trousers. Researchers estimate that producing a single ivory bead takes approximately 1 hour of patient labor. 10,000 total hours to make the beads found in these 3 graves. The adult male alone was buried with approximately 3,000 beads, along with 25 ivory armbands and 12 pierced fox canines. The 2 adolescents had mammoth ivory spears, 6 feet long, straightened by heating. In a world before agriculture, before metallurgy, before permanent settlements, this community chose to spend 10,000 hours making objects that would be buried in the ground. Not traded, not used, not inherited. Buried. You don't do that for someone unless their existence mattered to you. Enormously. Publicly, irreversibly. Deep inside a cave system near Johannesburg, South Africa, down a passage so narrow that only unusually small and flexible researchers could squeeze through, scientists discovered the remains of at least 15 individuals belonging to a species called Homo naledi. Homo naledi's brain was approximately 1/3 the size of yours. The researchers who found them, led by paleoanthropologist Lee Berger, have argued that the bodies were deliberately placed in these chambers. That Homo naledi was carrying its dead deep underground, intentionally. If that is true, the implications are staggering. Mortuary behavior would predate Homo sapiens by over 100,000 years. That claim has been fiercely disputed. Other scientists argue the evidence is insufficient. The debate is ongoing, actively contested, unresolved. But the question it forces is real, regardless of how the evidence ultimately settles. Why did we assume that grief was ours alone? We built this narrative, sophisticated modern humans, on one side, primitive creatures on the other. And find after find keeps pushing that line further back, keeps finding it blurred, keeps discovering that the impulse to not simply walk away from the dead is older and more widely shared than we wanted to admit. At some point, whether 78,000 years ago in Kenya, or 30,000 years ago in Russia, or possibly far earlier in the dark chambers of South Africa, something crossed a threshold. The body of someone who had died became something more than a biological problem to be managed. It became a site of meaning, of memory, of ceremony. Someone decided that this particular arrangement of bones mattered, that it deserved more than abandonment. Modern grief counselors tell us that rituals help, that the act of doing something, of gathering, of marking, of making tangible what we feel, helps the living process the loss of the dead. The function of burial may have been exactly this, tens of thousands of years before we had language to describe what grief even was. We traded our ceremonies for convenience. We delegated the dead to professionals, moved death out of the home, built institutions to manage our grief at a sanitary distance. What we gained in efficiency, we may have lost in something harder to name. And the Sungir beads sit in a museum in Moscow, 10,000 hours of labor, buried in the ground for 30,000 years. For someone. Because they were worth it. Who are you picturing right now? If you found yourself thinking of someone specific, then you understand what those hands were doing 30,000 years ago in the dark, drilling holes through mammoth ivory, one bead at a time. Subscribe if you want more of this. And we'll see you next time.